Hello English 220. I thought it would be best if I used the screen to actually walk through some of the formatting, paragraph building, and MLA things with you. So if you could follow along, it probably would be helpful if you also have your computer open and we can kind of walk through this together. So when we're talking about essay composition, I think there's two important pieces that we need to discuss, especially if you haven't written an academic research paper in a little while, or maybe you didn't have a good sound skill set when you left English 110. So I like to make sure that we have a good refresher. So if you go under modules, there's this essay writing materials folder where I try to put things that I think would be useful in terms of essay construction. And I'd like to start with the short essay guide here. What we tried to do with this is put sort of all of the formatting reminders into one place. And it also talks to you a little bit about paragraph building. I'm a firm believer that if you can build a strong paragraph, you can build a strong essay. The paragraph sort of is the building block of your essay. So one good paragraph repeated multiple times makes a good essay. So if we open this up and download it so we can see it better, and I'm going to zoom in for you. Basically, I use this in most of my composition classes to do a reminder of MLA. I'm going to talk to you about APA today as well, but I want to start with MLA because it's sort of for English instructors, it's the foundation. So we teach MLA, which is the Modern Language Association, in our English courses. And that just means that your English faculty learned this method of citation in their discipline. So if you go into the behavioral, social, or other sciences, you're going to experience more APA, which is the American Psychological Association. The biggest difference for me, which we'll get into a little bit later, is that APA is very much more direct. The writing is more formulaic. It's written more like a report. And MLA is the citing method of the humanities. So there's a little bit more narrative. And MLA is dictated by author name and page number, where APA is very concerned with the date the research was done, which makes sense. So in MLA, you won't have the section titles and the cover page that you have in APA, and I'll show you the difference between those. But for now, this is a reminder of how to do an essay in MLA. Most of our essays will be about 6 to 7 pages, and basic Times New Roman, 12 font, 1-inch margins. Everything is double spaced. You have this heading in your upper left, and your last name and page number is the header over here on every page. In MLA, heading looks like this. And remember that every essay should have a title, and it should be centered in the middle of the page. You don't have to bold, underline, make it a different color. It really just is the title centered. And that's a big thing with both MLA and APA. They don't want you getting sort of funky with font, with bolding, with color. Every paper should look very much the same, and the reason they do that is because the content of your paper is the most important. So if I'm reading through a batch of essays, and some of them are in blue ink, some of them the font is large, some of them the font is small, it detracts from the content. If the formatting can all look the same, then really your ideas are what flavor the essay, not the font and the colors. We want all of that to be the same. It also makes it challenging to read through a group of essays when they're all in different fonts and formats. So it's just a way of standardizing our academic writing. So MLA, as I said, is dictated by author. If you have an author in both MLA and APA, you always start there. So if you're looking at your article or source and it has an author, then these are your in-text citations. So when you want to use this quote in your essay, you want to give credit to the author. And if you notice, this is a direct quote, which means we took these words directly from the article. So we need to put quotation marks around it. And notice it's the starting quote goes here, the ending quote goes here. Then we do our parentheses, our author. And many of your sources are not going to have page numbers. So I often tell you to default to page 1, which just means, this doesn't mean it's your first source. It means that the information you're reading was on technically the first page, because you have a lot of things where you're scrolling through websites and you're not going to have multiple pages. But MLA really needs a page number, so I always say default to page 1. And then notice you close your parentheses and your period goes at the end. And the reason your period goes at the end is because after you put a direct quote in, you're probably going to say something about it, right, in your own words. So it's important that there's a period here because you're going to start a new sentence here. And a lot of people want to put a period here as well. No period here. There's also, as you notice in MLA, there's no comma between the last name and the page number. MLA is really straightforward now, and they don't want to, it's very simplified and they don't want to overcomplicate it. But let's say you have a really good source that doesn't have an author listed, and there's going to be plenty of them. Even just in Credo Reference, one of the library databases, often just has an entry or article title and is not does not give credit to an author, because there may be a collection of authors. So in that case, you want to take the article or entry title instead. So again, same quote, we can still use it, but we don't have an author attached to the work. So we're going to instead put the article title. And the way you know this is an article title is because it has quotation marks around it. So an infinite generation is the name of the article we got this quote from if we don't have an author. That's what we use inside our parenthetical citation. And again, it's a page 1 if we don't have multiple pages. And notice everything stays the same. The very last resort is if you really can't find an author, you can't identify an article title, we can then use the website or larger work that it came from. We want to avoid this because if I'm reading your essay and I see that your source comes from biotechnology.org, this is probably a really giant website. And so it's difficult to find your exact article on it and without doing an extensive search. So the more specific we can get, the better. But also remember, these are just a tag to your works cited. So we're just identifying that this information is not ours. We got it from a different source. And this is like a little red tag so that your reader can then go here and see the entire works cited entry. These don't necessarily match, but it's the general gist is if you tag it here, this is the last page of your paper and it's going to have all your sources listed with all this good information. You don't need all that information in the body of your essay. Some students will choose to introduce the quote where you might say something like, Dr. Maya Smith says the first person to live forever has already been born. And that's where if you've already introduced your source, and notice what I did there. And I think it's smart to do it like this. This is introducing the author and where you got the source information from before you put the quotation in. And that's helpful because You're not just dropping a quotation in the middle of your paragraph. You're giving the reader some idea of who Dr. Maya Smith is, and then you're putting her direct quote right there. And notice that's where this page 1 becomes important, is that we don't need to reintroduce Smith. We have her right here, her last name. So we don't need to put Smith in here. We just need to put the page number, and that closes your parenthetical citation. So I think this is a really smart way to set up an in-text citation, because we get a sense of who said this and in what context. So, and we could do the same here. If I could spell entitled, that'd be good. And then again, we've already introduced the article title. And Science Magazine is a large work, so it does have to be italicized. So we introduced the information that we have about the source. So we don't then need to have it in here. We just need the page number. But everything else stays the same. So I think this is a good example of how you can introduce your sources before you drop the quote in the middle. This also works if you want to paraphrase information. So let's say what we're using right now is Dr. Smith's direct quote, but we could also paraphrase the gist of what Dr. Smith says. So notice what I did there. Dr. Smith argues that we have advanced and will continue to advance in medicine and technology. And this is not the best wording, to the extent that there is someone already born that will live forever. Not the best wording, but you get my gist. So again, we've already introduced Smith, but this is not our information. We had to find this information from our source. So we need to give it credit still. And again, we have Smith already introduced, so we just need the page number here. And then your reader will say, who is Smith? And they'll look at your works cited and make sure they know where the information's coming from. So that's a way to do a direct quote, a paraphrase, and also to introduce a quote in the middle of your paragraph. Because again, no matter what you do here, let's say we use this next sentence is always your analysis. And before we introduce this quote, this sentence is always your topic sentence. So anytime we use research, we really have to sandwich it between our own words. So we start a sentence here, we give some information, then we analyze that information, and perhaps we give another quote. So we're building evidence directly into our paragraphs. I'll show you further down below what that looks like. And then an MLA Works Cited sheet, which is where we list all of our sources. There's no heading. You don't need this heading on a Works Cited sheet. The title is simply Works Cited. It's in alphabetical order by the author, article title, or website title. There are no numbers, and we indent the second line. So if this was a true works cited entry, we would double space it. And then depending on the word package you have, many times, you may have learned this in Comp 1, we'll take this and we will go to layout, I think. Nope. Paragraph. And we want a hanging indent. Let's see if it will work. And my spacing's a little messy. Oh, yeah, that's way too big. So did you notice what I did there? So let's undo that. So let's go back to, where did I find that? Paragraph, right here. And that hanging indent is way too big. So hanging, and we want it to be like minimal. I think a 0.3 hanging indent's good. And there you go. That's how your works cited entries should look. And then they're in alphabetical order according to last name. I love that hanging indent thing. Try that on your own computer if you haven't already. And then this just tells you it's no good to have a citation here if you don't understand what it all means. So do you know who the author is, the title, where it came from? And what's great about the databases is they'll give you this whole citation just by clicking the cite button in the databases. So those are some MLA formatting pieces to know. And then down here, I have a brief explanation of how to build paragraphs, intro paragraphs, and body paragraphs. So some suggestions about how to set up your introduction and your conclusion, but this is where the meat of your essay is coming in, right? Your body paragraph in an academic research paper is the most important. So have we identified what each of your paragraphs are about? And so we want to state the main idea here. And then we want to use some of your research. So can we put a quote or information in from your research and cite it? Can we put that in our own words and remind us what this has to do with the point of your paper? Can we find another quote from your research? So I think at this point in your academic career, I think it's okay to have 2 citations per paragraph to support the point you're making. And then can you put that in your own words, and can you conclude and transition to your next body paragraph? So for your first essay, I think you're probably writing 3 or 4 context body paragraphs, and you're writing 3 or 4 body paragraphs about your pieces of rhetoric. So in thinking about setting up your paper, I think you want to decide what each of these body paragraphs are going to be about. So when you're thinking about, let's say you're doing Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, those first 3 body paragraphs should be setting some context for the Civil Rights Movement and who Martin Luther King Jr. was. Your second 3 body paragraphs should then be focused on maybe 3 of his speeches. So determining what your body paragraphs are going to be about will help you begin to build this structure. But I really do, I look for you're making a main claim in your first sentence, you're citing from your research, you're analyzing that research in your own words, you're citing from your research again, analyzing, and transitioning to your next point. And then I think conclusions are really tough. You want to sort of sum up where we've been in your essay and then leave us with sort of a last impact. And then of course, grammar is how clear your sentences are. So when you read them out loud, there's clarity. You don't hear a lot of repetition. The sentences don't feel clunky and awkward. And that can be achieved just by reading your essay out loud. punctuation is you're actually looking at your punctuation marks. So your apostrophes, your commas, your semicolons, your periods, and making sure they're in their correct place. And then last but not least, spelling. You can't always catch everything on a spell check. You should certainly start there, but there's nuances like the multiple forms of there. So I'm going to take a break right now from this, but this is a good starting document to remind you about formatting and to give you a sense when we're talking about essay construction. It really starts at this paragraph level, so determining what each of your paragraphs is about and making sure you have research that aligns with each point you're making is a really good start to setting up your paper. Okay, let's take a quick break from that.